Do you know what's one of the unique characteristics about the modern era of American politics, which I haven't seen any political scientist or philosopher speak about before? It's the following. Every single political faction, liberals, conservatives, leftists of various kinds, they are all forced to put forth their politics as if they were somehow a contending force for power. Even if they were the most archetypical example of the dominant ideas and the dominant institutions, they can't make that explicit. They have to always act as if they don't have power in order to somehow sustain the power that they objectively have. Even the most so-called centrist of liberals, they'll do this. They'll present a scenario where normalcy has been hijacked and there's been this great threat to democracy brought about by conservatives, and they're the radical forces that are fighting in order to have normalcy regained. The conservatives do this as well in very many different ways. For instance, a figure like Andrew Tate is constantly talking about this image from the Matrix of the red pill, where you're supposed to take the red pill in order to escape the Matrix. But for instance, in the figure of Andrew Tate, it becomes quite explicit that what is the way that you escape the Matrix? Well, you get a bunch of friends and you become rich. But what is that if not the archetypical ideology of what Du Bois called the American assumption? The idea that through thrift and hard work, you can, irrespective of background, come to the US and get rich. So, very interestingly, I think what we have in our current political conjuncture that is unprecedented is a condition, if I can, be excused to get a little bit jargony, where hegemony, the ruling ideas, in order to preserve themselves, have to be performed, have to be put forth as if they are lost, as if they have lost their status of being the ruling ideas. It is almost as if hegemony, in order to sustain itself, has to constantly present itself as if hegemony has been lost and as if it is fighting a counter-hegemonic struggle. And this is unprecedented. I write in some of my books, specifically The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism, that the role that the Western left, that the Western Marxists have played, is as a controlled form of counter-hegemony. So as a group of people and an institution, a framework of thought that presents itself as radical, as challenging the system, but that in reality just gets the dissenting energies of the public, of the populace, and allows it to be folded into a pro-imperialist fold in a way that it's, of course, promoted by the institutions of the dominant order. But that's not only the case anymore. It's not just the case that a way of keeping hegemony is having forms of controlled counter-hegemony that serve hegemony. Today, hegemony itself has to present itself as counter-hegemonic in order to preserve hegemony itself. So it's almost as if you have a condition where the best way to get the effect of the Matrix blue pill is to drink the red pill. It's if Plato's allegory of the cave that comes from Book 7 of his Republic, if it was written today, it would be more accurate to write it instead as a form of labyrinth, where once you escape the first cave, you think you have escaped the cave in general, but in reality, you're in a different, more advanced, more complex cave that you are unaware of the fact it is even a cave in the first place. And this reminds me of a skit called Max and Patty Go to Prison from Peter Kay, where this prisoner is beginning to dig a tunnel to escape the prison, and his cellmate, once he's shown the tunnel, he gets flustered. And he can't understand initially why his cellmate is so flustered, and then his cellmate tells him, "What are you digging a tunnel to? To the cell next door?" And then he notices that the tunnel he's been digging the whole time is not to go outside the prison, but to the cell next door. In many ways, all political factions in our day and age have to present themselves as trying to escape the prison, but in reality, the vast majority of them intentionally or otherwise, are really just digging a pathway to the cell next door. Now, this shouldn't take us to the nihilism that you find, for instance, in postmodern theorists, where what you have is the suspension of oneself to a purported position of objectively recognizing universal entrapment, and it ends up being its own form of epistemological escape that serves entrapment itself, where this condition of the various forms of purportedly dissident politics getting absorbed back into the dominant order is generalized as a universal phenomenon, that every form of resistance naturally and necessarily gets reabsorbed into the ruling order. That is itself a way of presenting a radical hypothesis that it's fully compatible with the existing order. I mean, there's it's hard not to see Thatcher's Tina, there's no alternative, in a perspective like this, because quite literally they're saying there's no alternative, because all apparent alternatives just end up collapsing into what is already, end up collapsing into the dominant order. And that itself plays the role of what Kerry Shukrov has called the impossibility, the radicalization of the impossibility of exit. So I'm not trying to make the point that the postmodernists do, which is that all forms of escape just end up getting reabsorbed into the dominant order. I think that is itself an example of that. The point I'm trying to make is that while we should reject that nihilistic position, we should be realist to the fact that today there has been constructed a whole industry of escaping the matrix whose sole purpose and end is entrenching us deeper into the matrix, perhaps in forms that are more profound and complex because we don't even recognize as the matrix itself. So, in other words, today, a good chunk of dissident politics, which it's basically all forms of politics because the most hegemonic of politics presents itself as dissident in our time, what it is actually doing is like that Peter K. skit, presenting an escape of the prison, which is in reality just positioning yourself in the cell next door whilst remaining perfectly entrenched within the prison. So don't fall into the complete nihilism of the postmodernists as to the possibilities of real change, but also be conscious of the fact and be consistently self-critical and self-assessing of what it is that you're doing and analyzing each instance. Is this a form of dissent that is in reality entrapping my political practice even deeper into the structures that be, in a way that for the structures that be itself, that form of dissent becomes an integral and necessary component?